Hi, I'm Christine, and today I would love for you to make jalapeno cheddar sourdough bread with me. This recipe is from Heartbeet Kitchen. I do change it a little bit because I can't just follow a recipe. The only thing that I'm going to change about this recipe is she has listed to use 375 grams of organic bread flour. And in her recipes, when she specifies to use organic bread flour, normally I use an organic stone milled bread flour that I source locally here in Southern Ontario. It's unbleached, organic, but it's still high protein, white, very fine flour. And I find that flour works best. Some other bread flours that are on the market, such as the 1847 bread flour, is more of a whole grain flour, and it does not do justice to her recipes when you use it in place of her bread flour. I do, however, love the 1847 mill bread flour blend. So what I do is, instead of putting 375 grams of organic bread flour and only 30 grams of whole wheat flour into this recipe, I use 300 grams of the organic bread flour and 105 grams of the 1847 mill bread flour. I have made this before. That's what I used, and it was delicious. It had substance, it was chewy, it was flavorful, so that's what we're gonna go with again. But if you would like to try something different or follow her recipe exactly, I'm sure it will also be delicious. Did you find it?
No.
Oh, okay. All right, come on in and get dry. Yesterday, my kids lost a quail while they were doing quail chores, so couldn't find him last night. Of course, we have lots of snow, and he's a white quail. So I sent them out today one last time just for good measure, but if any of you have quail, you know once they escape, they either hide because everything eats them, or they continue to jump and fly until they're just gone. So
we have a bunch of quail. It doesn't really matter if we lose just one.
it does matter if we lose just one. Anyway, do you guys need anything? Go play, okay? Oh, Henry, you're all full of mud in the back of your shirt. Could you get changed for a second?
I have mud in my pants.
And mud in your pants. Go get some other warm, dry clothes on, okay? Some clean clothes. Put those in dirty laundry. I'll wash them today. The sourdough starter that I'll wash your bucket today, bud. The sourdough starter that I'm going to use is actually a child, I guess, an offspring of the sourdough starter that I revived a couple videos ago from some really gnarly looking starter that I pulled out of my fridge. This sourdough starter, because my house is a little chilly right now, I mixed it all up yesterday in the late afternoon, fed it what it needed to be fed, and then I put it downstairs on our top of our water tank heater, which worked out really well. It was just warm enough for it to give it a little bit of extra heat and rise overnight. So as you can see, it's super bubbly, liquidy. I can tell by the line on the jar that it hasn't fallen. It's only risen so far.
Pajamas.
Then find some sweatpants, some cozy pants. So I know that this is ready to use. I fed it with organic bread flour because that's what I was going to be using mostly in this recipe. I always kind of like to try to feed it with a mixture of everything that I'm going to be using in the bread recipe, just to give the yeast a little taste of what's coming. So I am going to make 2 loaves. I will do them in 2 separate batches because eventually you have to fold into this one the cheddar and the jalapenos. So it's not really going to be conducive to making it in one bowl. Sometimes if I do just a basic everyday sourdough, I will double the recipe in one bowl and then just split it when I go to shape the dough. But for this recipe, I'm just going to keep them separate. So another thing you need if you're going to be making sourdough is a scale. I do everything by weight now, and it might seem overwhelming or a little bit daunting, But weighing by scale or measuring by scale, yes, you do. My son's taking apart my dryer, so we're gonna pause for 1 second before I get going here, and I'm just gonna figure out why we have the lint trap up in the kitchen. Okay, he was looking for pajamas in the dryer. Decided to empty the lint trap in the kitchen. I don't know. Boys are fun. So, put my bowl on, zero out my scale, and I need 50 grams of sourdough starter. So we just take this delicious, I guess I could use that hand, you see a little better, and just watch the scale. I don't fuss if it's a gram or two over. 45, 48, 51. Sometimes you just get, I'm gonna have just enough to make two. And now we need 300 grams of filtered water at room temperature. Because we are on a cistern here, we have a filter in the basement. It has a physical filter and also the blue light filters, so I have no problems using the water directly from my cistern, whether or not we get that from town initially, or if we get it from the roof, from the rain. When I first started, I would always keep a cold batch of boiled water on hand, just because I wasn't confident in what the water directly from my tap would do. But over time, I've realized that's not necessary. The filtration system that we have is just fine. If you're working with cistern water or town water, I would recommend filtering it first. You really do want to get all the yuckies out of it. You can filter it probably by boiling it and giving it a couple days to air out. That would probably be good enough. Or you can just buy a jug of water if you plan on making sourdough bread. You don't need a lot of water, like that's 300 grams. This is gonna make one loaf. So if you're only making a loaf a week, go grab yourself 300 grams of water from the grocery store, mineral water. Another tool that I absolutely love for making sourdough bread is a Danish whisk. I kind of hummed and hawed when I first started making sourdough bread, whether or not I needed it. But yeah, you need it. It makes your life way easier. You can find them for around $10. I think I got mine off Amazon, but I've also seen them at Canadian Tire of all places. I'm sure in the States they're more readily available. I find that a lot of this type of stuff is just more readily available in the States, so you might be able to find one for cheaper. All right, so the starter and the water are all incorporated. Yeah, pajamas. Okay, go snuggle. When Nellie goes with Grandma, okay? I know. Now we're gonna measure in our flour. This is my 1847 ml stone ground daily bread flour. I need 105 grams of that, so I just watch my scale as I sprinkle it in. This is a dangerous game. You can measure into a separate bowl first if you're not as confident. Sometimes I over measure and I just scrape the little dry bits off the top and throw it back in. I use flour enough that I'm not overly concerned that it would go bad or something would happen to it. Okay, now we're gonna zero out our scale again, and we're gonna do our 300 grams of bread flour. I buy my bread flour from a mill, and I buy it in bulk, so it comes in giant bulk boxes. This one is from Oak Manor. As you can see, it's a really nice, fine, white flour. Oak Manor's all-purpose flour and bread flour are actually the same thing. Not really sure how they manage that, but that's what they claim, and I've never had any issues using it in my bread at all. And when I bake bread for the kids, they prefer white bread. So I need to keep bulk on hand and just store it in totes. All right, now we mix this together until it forms a shaggy dough. It is going to seem really dry. You'll think like, oh no, like I need to add more water, especially if you're used to making traditional bread. But that is not the case with this recipe, or any of her sourdough recipes for that matter. They will seem dry at the beginning, but as the flour absorbs all the liquid, you will have this beautiful dough when it starts to ferment. And if you start messing around with the water and the flour trying to get something right, then you are going to have a completely different crumb to your bread than what Amanda from Heartbeet Kitchen intended, which is not good or bad. If you'd like to experiment, all the power to you. I've done a lot of experimenting with her basic sourdough bread recipes, but I find that her recipes are something that I can trust to make exactly as in the recipe, and it works out for me. So you'll find that some recipes just don't seem to work out, and I think it's the type of flour that they use. I'm very cautious to find recipes that use flour that is stone ground flour, because stone ground flour will absorb water much differently than traditional bread flours. So I would recommend finding a recipe online if you're making a sourdough bread that you trust. Try a couple of their recipes and see if your flour matches up. All right, so we now actually have a beautiful dough here. I don't know if you can see that there. It's all come together a little bit. You still have a little bit dry bits, a little bit of wet bits. But now what we're gonna do is cover it with a wet rag so you don't lose a lot of moisture. We're just gonna let it sit for 40 minutes. We're gonna let the flour and the sourdough starter and the water all kind of do their work together, and then we'll come back to it. Okay, it's been about 40 minutes. The recipe does call to sprinkle the salt on top of the dough before you put it to rest for the 40 minutes. I don't find it makes a difference if you add the salt to the top of the dough before you let it rest or after. It does help the salt liquefy a little bit if you do add it before, but with the overnight ferment in the fridge that I do at the end, I don't ever find that I have salty bits or sections of my bread. So we now add 8 grams of fine sea salt. Salt matters. Find a good quality sea salt. Okay, that was too much salt. So we get 11. All right, there we go. So I can do this because I have my second, loaf waiting for salt too. So it's not a big deal. I'm just gonna make a separate little pile of salt here. There we go. We got 8 grams of salt. Okay. So your salt is now sitting on top of your bread. This is kind of what it looks like. The bread has sat, the flour is absorbed. It's starting to look a lot less dry and shaggy. So now what we're gonna do is we're going to take our fingers, poke that salt into your bread. This is gonna actually count as your first set of stretch and folds. We're just gonna poke. If you find that the bread is sticking to your fingers, just put a tiny bit of water on your fingers. It'll help the bread not to stick. When I do stretch and folds, I usually dampen my hands so that as the bread sits, it does not stick to my hands, because it will get more hydrated. The flour will hydrate through. So, I'm not sure if you can see. I'm going to move this over as far as I can. I'm just pulling up and stretching over. You can see right now, if I were to just grab this, it would all break. It would break. So the gluten's not very developed in this flour. What we're doing by stretching and folding and giving it time is allowing the gluten to develop. So that is more than enough for our first set of stretch and folds. We're going to put our cloth back over. And now it just goes to rest for another half an hour. Okay, we're back. It's been another half an hour. I'm gonna bring the dough a little bit closer to show you. As you can see, it is quite sticky. It's sticking to my fingers, and we have to gather that dough and flip it over. We have to stretch it and fold it. Literally stretch it and fold it. So I'm gonna make my hands a little bit wet. So, got a little bit of water. And now, as you can see, look at that, no sticking. So, we're gonna pull this up and you can already see the dough is stretching a lot more. You've developed that gluten. You do it one, you do it twice, turn the bowl, and three. Oh, you can see by the third time it's starting to get a little stretchy. This gluten is already really doing well. It's developing amazingly well, actually. There's no breakage. I can stretch it and fold it into a nice little dough again. And then it gets to rest for another half an hour. So that's what it looks like now. Again, a nice ball. Cover it with the rag, with the wet tea towel, and set for half an hour. Okay, back for the third set of stretch and folds. This is what our bread is looking like now. You can see there's actually, oh, I'm gonna get a shadow there. There's a bubble right here. Oh, it's gonna pop. Oh, right there, there he is. Beautiful bubble. Our yeast is working beautifully. I'm gonna get my hands wet. We're gonna stretch and fold this one more time. So for the third time, we are just going to pull our dough up. Oh, you can see how beautifully it's stretching. There's something called the window pane test where you can stretch this out. When your dough is super thin that you can see through it like a window pane, you know that your gluten is finished developing. So I'm really happy with the way the gluten has developed in all of this. I'm gonna just give it a little wiggle. Fold it over, do one more, and then we have to let it just sit for another half an hour before we add our cheddar and our jalapenos. Okay, we're back. Our third ferment and our half an hour rest, or our third stretch and fold, and then our half an hour rest are done. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to see my head or if it's going to get cut off in this part, but I thought it was more important to show you the counter so you can see what I'm doing with the bread, because it is time to take our sourdough bread and stuff it with the cheese and jalapenos and get it wrapped up, where then I'm going to put it back in the bowl where it's going to do its bulk ferment for the next 7 hours. So what we're looking at. It's nice and glossy and wonderful. Turn a little light on there, maybe you can see better. You see at the edge of the bowl here, we have some bubbles forming. Yeah, it's really doing well today. I found my kitchen quite cold, but I guess my bread finds the kitchen just fine. All right. So I did put a little bit of flour down on the surface just to make sure the dough didn't stick. Now we need to stretch it out so it's about 12 inches by 14 inches. You can let gravity help you. in a triangle here. That's okay. Put it down and get it stretched out properly. All right, here we go. Gonna kind of just pull these sides out and away. Because we put flour down to the counter, this dough isn't gonna stick to the counter, which is equal parts good and frustrating, because then the dough wants to bounce back on itself because it's not sticking to the counter. So a bit of a thick piece over here. Again, this doesn't have to be an exact science. You are going to, this is not a shaping, this is just to stuff your bread. So I've got it spread out. I have a little bit of a thick spot there, but I'm not gonna worry about it overly much. I pre-portioned out, this is actually 200 grams of cheese because I'm making 2 loaves. So I'm just gonna about put half of this. It's a sharp cheddar. It's a sharp cheddar without the dye because I don't know why we need dye in cheese. So I buy white cheddar without the orange dye whenever it's available. All right, that's about half the bowl. And a couple more for good measure. Right in that thick spot. Now we need about 60 grams of jalapeno, pickled jalapenos. So this is just a jar I picked up at our local European store. I'm sure jalapeno peppers are sold a lot of different places. And because I've already made this bread once, I kind of know about how many jalapenos I'm looking for. So just gonna spread them out between the cheese. And actually, it's not that spicy of a bread. I don't like spicy food, and I found this bread to be very enjoyable. We ate it with, I want to say, I dipped it in a homemade sort of a chili. There we go. That's a little bit more than 60 grams, I think, but it's gonna be good. All right, got our jalapenos. Now, in the instructions, she tells you how to fold this over. So it's really easy. You're gonna take your one side here, and gather it up, and you're gonna fold it towards the middle. Bingo bango. You're gonna gather this side up. You may have to hold on to some of your ingredients here, and you're gonna pull it over this way. Okay? Now I do have an end that's a little smaller. This end's a little bit wider, so I'm gonna start the smaller end, and we're just gonna gently fold it over, roll up all those ingredients in there. Here we go. We have a nice, beautiful ball. It's gonna stick to me a little because I'm not wet. But that's gonna go back into the bowl, covered with a tea towel. And it needs about 6 hours. Now this can vary on the temperature of your house. So what I'm gonna do is, because I find my house very cold today and I'm not cooking anything else that's gonna have my oven turned on, I'm gonna turn on the oven light in my oven. This is something I've tested. My oven light does nothing except for warm my oven. I've heard some people's oven lights will heat their oven past 100 degrees, and that you probably wouldn't want to keep your bread in there. I know mine just gives it a little bit of warmth, especially today it's damp. It'll take the dampness out of the oven, and it'll make sure that this is good to shape and put in the fridge for its final proof in 5 to 6 hours. So it's all tucked in, and in the oven it goes with the oven light on. I will also put a sign on my oven buttons that instruct everybody not to turn on the oven, because that would be a disaster. Okay, so it has been about 6 hours. My dough has been proofing. It's doing its final rise. As you can see on the top here, got like a bubble there that actually goes all the way through. It's glossy on top. That's what you want to look for. See a little better there. A little glossy on top, got a bubble. So I'm very carefully gonna scrape it out. A little bit of flour left from before. Have a bench scraper, also a really good tool. I prefer the one, just my cheapo plastic one that has a curved edge. Really helps to scrape it out of the bowl. So I'm gonna start by loosening it around the edge. Now this is never as graceful a process as I want it to be. But I'm gonna get her out here on the table. There we go. And then it's gonna rest for another 15 minutes. Okay, they've been sitting here long enough for me to do a few dishes. And now I'm just gonna get ready to roll them. I'm actually going to not roll. I'm gonna shape one into a rectangle, a batard, and I'm going to shape one into a bowl or a circle. I just bought myself this new batard pan. You can see it, it's a rectangle. I had a really hard time finding something that was that shape that was really gonna hold the bread for me. For bowls, I've been using these vintage Tupperware strainers. I just put a cheesecloth in them and they make beautiful, beautiful round loaves of sourdough bread. So don't feel like you have to go out and buy expensive things. You can use something you have or something you find at the thrift store. Plastic bowl might even work if you're shaping a bowl. So this one's gonna be my batard. So you see I've kind of spread it out. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grab this side and I'm gonna fold it over. Ooh, stay in there, ingredients. And I'm gonna grab this side, I'm gonna fold it over. Now, this is similar to the way that we wound it up before when we were putting it for its bulk rise. Now, this is difficult to get a tight top on. That's what I'm doing here. I'm just dragging it on the surface of the counter. You'll see I didn't flour my counter first this time because I want to try to get a nice tight top on here. That's what will give you that beautiful rise tomorrow when you bake it. So I do want to tuck those ends under a bit. Ooh, got a jalapeno there. Some of these jalapenos are just going to have to go in the top. I don't think we're going to be getting this super thick. You may have been able to actually take the jalapenos and dry them first. That would solve a little bit of this issue of them slipping out of the dough because they're wet. I'm not overly concerned about it. I'm sure this dough is going to be just fine and delicious. So I've got myself as tight as I think it's going to get as a batard. You need to flour. I don't know if I still have my strainer. Flour, what do I do? So I just use a little bit of gluten-free flour blend. I don't know why I use it. I heard once upon a time rice flour was good for dusting your linens so that your bread didn't stick for them. And I happen to have some that nobody in my house was going to eat. So there we go. All right. So what we're going to do now is you created a nice little seam under here. We're just going to lay it seam side up into its bed. As you can see there, there's a little seam. Oh, don't slide away. Yeah, we can get that seam an extra little pinch and tuck. All right, get that cheese in there. And what I'm actually going to do is use one of these damp cloths, again, that we've been using all day. And I'm going to cover it because these are going to rest all night long in the fridge and you don't want them losing their moisture. Okay, now we're going to shape our boule or our round loaf. I had my second one setting. So I'm actually going to flip that over. I'm working with this side. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to pick it up a little, stretch it into the center here. There we go. Kind of got a little ball shape there. And flip over. And then we're just going to drag her around the counter. Now you'll see I'm pulling in all directions for this round loaf. I mean, this is tricky because of all the jalapenos and the cheese in it. It is not going to shape like any other loaf of sourdough bread that you make. So all the add-ins that are in here that make it delicious. So again, you don't have to be worried about getting it super tight on top. My last loaf was not super tight on top and it was absolutely delicious. All right, again, has a little dust. Try not to get jalapenos in my flour. There we go. And again, you're gonna scoop and you're gonna put the seam side up. You wanna pinch over if you can and make it a little bit tighter on the top. This is not gonna cooperate with me, that's okay. And same thing. I've got my wet cloth from earlier today. It's gonna go on top. And I have a bag in here that I keep in my bowl drawer. It's my bird rising bag. So when I'm baking 4 loaves or less at a time, I know that it's going to fit in this bag, and this will just give me extra insurance that these breads aren't going to lose their moisture overnight as they sit in the fridge. So put them in here, and I'm going to go down and tuck them into the fridge for the night. Okay, hi. It's very early the next morning. I'm just working on my first cup of coffee. Got my bread out of the fridge. Preheated my oven already, so that's done. Now it's time to flip it out of its baskets onto some parchment and get it baking. So I just put the parchment on top of the bread loaf, fold it with my hand, and flip it over onto the counter. Find that's the easiest way. I don't have anything to slide it into the oven. And I'm going to sprinkle it with a little bit more flour, just so when it does open up, we get a nice effect. Now, because of all the cheddar cheese and the jalapenos in here, you're not going to be able to score it very easily. Scoring is when you...
Are you making jalapeno bread?
I am making jalapeno bread. Scoring is when you cut into the loaf so that it can rise in the oven. So you do have to make sure that you get a few good cuts in here. And I'm actually going to do just a crisscross cut, but a little bit unevenly because there's just cheese and jalapeno in my way everywhere. So there we go, there's one cut. The nice thing about having this dough in the fridge overnight is that it's really cold, and I'm gonna make the cuts towards the middle a little bit extra deep, except for that piece of cheese there, because then hopefully it'll really open up in the center for me. You can make like some pretty cuts on the sides. They may or may not come out depending on where your cheese is. All right. So I'll just kind of take you on a trip here just to show you. So I'm just gonna pick this up, whoop, whoop, hang on to those like handles. I have preheated my oven for the last half hour to 475. This is hot, a hot Dutch oven. It's been preheating with my oven on the inside. The bread's gonna go in the Dutch oven with the lid on in the oven for 20 minutes. The lid on the Dutch oven keeps all that steam. You know how we're very careful to keep the moisture in the bread? That's so that when it rises, there's more steam produced, and that'll help your bread rise and really open up, and you'll get that beautiful, beautiful sourdough artisan look to your loaf that you like. So I'm gonna do that with my other loaf as well. Get them both in the oven and bake them according to the directions.
To make a snowflake.
So that's our bowl. You see how it baked up there. And that's our petard. See how it's a little bit different. You hear them? I wish you could smell them.